I want to tell you guys a story. Story happened quite a long time ago. There was this man, and he was coming out of the woods. He had been lost for a while. He was out of breath. He was panting, and he sees in front of him a tent. And so, like any good person, feeling overwhelmed by the elements, he runs into the tent, and someone is living there. It's a lady. And he looks at the lady and goes, "Is there any way that I can stay here, please?" And she says, "By all means, you are safe here. Come and relax in the tent." Now, if you've watched any horror movie, you know the minute someone says you are safe here, that should set off red flags. But it didn't for this guy. And so he sits down and he goes, I'm famished. Can you get me something to drink?" And so she does. She gets him something to drink, and he sips it down. And from the running and from the woods and from everything, he is tired and slowly starts to shut his eyes. And she says, "Don't worry, you can fall asleep here." This man falls asleep and lays on the ground of the tent. This great and loving lady who told the man he's safe here, as if you didn't see this coming, walks over to the toolbox in the house and pulls out a mallet, and then goes and grabs a tent stake, puts it right above the guy's temple as he's laying on the ground, and with one big swing, hammers the tent peg through his temple. Again and again, until he's dead, pinned to the ground. Now, I know some of you guys, you're hearing that and you're like, what the heck did Josh just say? This is supposed to be a church group, and he's telling us these really gruesome tales. And parents, if you're watching this, and some of you might be like, what is my kid watching here? It's a gruesome story. It's gross. It's disgusting. And yet it's from the Bible. Seriously, Judges 4. Check it out. It's a pretty cool story. What does that have to do with the Bible? What does that have to do with what we're talking about today? On our Sunday series, we've started to look at the Bible in a deeper way. I'm really challenging you guys as teenagers and the youth ministry as a whole to not live this surface level Christianity. So on Wednesday nights, we've been talking about stretching our faith. And in here, I want to talk about how we understand and get deeper into the Bible. Because I think as Christians, sometimes this is our biggest weakness. Reading it. Understanding it. I want to make sure that we are reading it and understanding it and actually applying it to our lives, but applying it to our lives correctly. And so last week we talked about how the entirety of the Bible is really Jesus. It's about Jesus and what he has done for us and how much God loves us. But when we look at Jesus in the Bible, it helps us focus on everything else. And today I want you to go a little bit deeper with me as we discuss another topic when it comes to the Bible. Have you ever read portions of the Bible and you've been like, huh? Like maybe you guys have the verse of the day app or something like that comes across your screen and you read it and you're like, huh, that's great. Don't understand that. Or you read some stories in the Bible, like the one I explained earlier, and you're like, wait, that's in the Bible? I mean, there's a story of bears eating boys in the Bible. Like big, huge grizzly bears coming out of the woods and tearing to pieces young boys. It's in there. Check it out. Or there's a story of an axe head floating up from the water, an iron axe head just, defying gravity, and instead of sinking, it rises to the top. And you read that and you're like, okay, what's the big deal there? It's an axe head. Why is that in the Bible? Or fish that spits out money. Again, in the Bible, they open up the fish's mouth and there was a coin there. What about there actually being a law in the Bible that you cannot wear a piece of clothing that is made up of two types of material? Do me a favor, pause it, check your shirt out. If your shirt actually has two types of material like cotton and polyester, guess what? You are living for the devil. Sorry. But have you ever done that? If you go through the Bible, sometimes you see these things, and when we grab just like a verse or just a little portion of the Bible and we read it, sometimes we don't completely understand, or we read it and we're like, what the heck is going on here? What does this mean? I want to dive deeper to help us understand even what the Bible is. Because if we look at the Bible, sometimes when we grab those little things, we're like, okay, well, this is the Bible, the book of life. It's supposed to be God's love story to us. But here's the thing that sometimes if you're just looking at the Bible, we don't fully comprehend. The Bible is actually made up of 66 different books. Different styles of books, different writings. I have over here some different books. Lots of different books. I have some history books, some math books. I have some books that I had to read when I was in school for preaching. I have some comic books. All of these different style and types of books. I mean, if you look at your bookshelf, if you guys have a bookshelf, I'm sure you will see all different types and styles of books. All of these things make up your shelf and in some way, somehow, even a portion of your life. Whether there's a book up there that you hate but you had to have it for school, or whether there was a book that was a gift to you that you've never actually read, or whether there's material on there that you actually enjoy reading, these shelves, these books somewhat make up a little bit of our life. So just for imagination's sake, let's fast forward years and years, decades and decades, and even a century or two down the road. Someone has Kylie, they have your bookshelf, and they grab it and they say, well, this was Kylie's life. These books were all important to her. They must have meant something to her. And so they start going through your bookshelf and applying every different type of book to your life. And so they come across a comic book and they're flipping through and they're like, oh my goodness, there's a guy in here named Thor. Wait, I remember reading somewhere that Kylie had a pet Thor. This must be a description and a physical representation of who Kylie's pet was. Well, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but that's what they're doing. Or they might read through different things and be like, okay, I see that you have a lot of math books. You must really love math. Math must be everything to you. It must be a huge part of your life. When the truth is, I mean, not a whole lot of people like math. See, when they start going through and they compile all of these books and say these books matter to your life, they matter in different ways. But if they just look at it as a whole and not in its context, it's hard or easy sometimes to misrepresent them. I mean, give the Bible, for instance. Do you guys know that there's historical books in the Bible? Books that are there to give genealogies, background of kings, the stories and the lives of some of these kings and different people, the story of creation, all of that kind of stuff. There are historical books in the Bible. There are also books of poetry. So when you read them, they're poems. There are books that are written to give wisdom. There are books written to give warning. There are letters written to different churches to explain what is going on or to encourage the churches. So when we read the Bible, the first thing you got to realize is there are all different styles and types of books in the Bible, and each one has a different purpose and a different reason. See, it's important to know the context of what we're reading in the Bible. And that is today's challenge. That's the thing that we're talking about today. It's a big word. It's a funky word. It's called context. But this is so important when it comes to reading scripture. See, the story that I explained to you earlier sounds like this awful murder tale of how this woman killed this poor young guy just wandering through the woods. And if I gave it to you in that way, that's how you would see it. But let me give you a little bit of context to this story. As I said, it comes from Judges 4. And what happened was Israel was being oppressed by this evil king and his army for 20 years. For 20 years, they were stealing from them, murdering them, pillaging their land. And finally, they cried out to God, and God rose up a judge. Her name was Deborah. And Deborah put together this really, really cool woman in the Bible. She put together this huge, huge army, and they went to battle this evil king. They battled it out, and Israel won, except that the king escaped. He ran away from the battle. He ran through the woods, and he came out across this woman's tent. This woman recognized him. The woman knew who he was. He didn't know who she was, though. See, she was an Israelite, a wife to one of the soldiers that went off to fight this evil king. So she invites the evil king in, and as he falls asleep, she is staring at a king who has stolen from her people for 20 years, attacked, killed, overwhelmed her people for 20 years. And so she puts a stop to him. Now, it's still a pretty gruesome story, but when you understand the context, you understand what is actually happening in this story. See, without context, sometimes people put together weird things, or they read verses or use verses for an agenda that they're trying to push without using any of the context. And so it seems like the Bible can be this evil thing or bad thing when people just pull it out of context and use it where they want. But that's why it's important when we read the Bible to understand the context, to understand what the Bible is actually saying. Let me give you an example. This is a very famous verse in Philippians 4:13, and it says this: "For I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength." For I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength. Now, I have heard this verse used a lot. I'm sure some of you guys have as well. I have heard this used by Christian teams as they're going out to beat another team. A team that they are no match for, and yet the coach, I've heard this said before, the coach goes to his team and he says, hey, remember, we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. So even though we are overwhelmed, God is going to give us the victory today in the game. I have heard people use this verse when it's a young guy and he's super nervous about asking that gorgeous young woman out on a date, and he's like, okay, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And he walks out and asks the girl out. He uses the verse to build him up. When there's a fight that's about to happen, I've seen people be like, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. When you're my height, it's average height, okay? I'm not short. But when you were my height and you were looking at that basketball hoop saying, and sadly I've been here before and even as a young kid used this, I looked at that and I was like, okay, I can dunk it. And there's no way I have the height nor the jump strength to actually dunk it. But as I'm looking at it and saying in a game of horse, I can do this, I start to run towards the hoop saying, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. What if sometimes we use verses that's actually not what they're meant for? So what's really going on in this verse? Let me show you how to break it down. Who wrote this verse? Does anyone know? It's actually Paul. Paul, who wrote most of the New Testament, wrote this verse, and he wrote the book of Philippians. Why did he write it? What's the purpose behind it? It's actually a letter. It was a letter to the church. To who? It was a letter to the church in Philippi. So why did he write this letter? I know this sounds really confusing and overwhelming, but this is important for us to understand because check this out. He wrote this to a church he was close to. A church he loved and they loved him. And as he's writing this letter and it gets sent to him, he's actually in prison. He's in prison for his faith. For believing in God and for living it out, he is in prison, and he is writing this letter to the church in Philippi after they have just given him a ton of resources. They've given him money to help him out, to help provide for him. And he's writing this letter to them, thanking them first off for giving him the stuff. But then he shares with them, I don't want you guys to keep on giving me stuff. I appreciate it, I do, but you don't have to feel obligated to do that. Because the truth is, whether I have a lot or a little, I know God will take care of me. Even though every situation right now in Paul's life was looking worse and worse and worse, he was saying that he was content with what he had to fill his stomach, with what he had for supplies around him. He was writing to them to say, I'm content whether I have a little or a lot. I'm content even with everything falling apart around me. And how was he so content with everything falling apart around him? He shared with them in 4:13 that even though everything was falling apart around him and everything was looking rough, he was content because he knew that I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength. He knew that when things were looking even at their worst, God would give him the strength to go through it all. So I'm not trying to be mean, but do you see how when I'm about to dunk a ball and I use that verse, it's kind of not really what that verse was meant to say? So then we look at it and say this: what does that apply to my life? How does that apply to you? That if Paul says in the good or the bad, he can do all things, no matter how hard, he can do them through Christ. He's not saying it as a genie in the bottle where you can just rub the lamp and God will give you whatever you want. In essence, how we apply that to our life is we say when we are feeling overwhelmed, when we are feeling persecuted or crushed for doing right and for living by faith, as Paul was, we know that God will give us the strength to get through it. Again, context matters, because see how understanding all that changes the way that we view the verse and how we apply it to our life. It's not a verse meant to give me Michael Jordan powers to dunk a ball. It's a verse to make you say when you are feeling overwhelmed, when you are feeling beaten down for doing right and for living by faith, when people persecute you for being a Christian, you can say, you know what? God will give me the strength to press through. See, when we start to look at context and the story behind it, it changes our view of that verse or that scripture and how it matters to my life and your life. One of my favorite books in the Bible is 2 Timothy. And when you read it, you can be like, okay, this is a good writing. Again, Paul wrote this to Timothy. And you can read it and you're like, okay, sometimes there's good stuff in there, sometimes there's not. But here's a little bit of the background here. Paul is writing the book of 2 Timothy to this young man, Timothy. This young man who he has helped raise, empower, and in essence, hand over his mantle, hand over his position to Timothy. He was mentoring him. And as Paul is writing this, he is in prison and he knows that his death is coming soon. He knows that he is about to die for being a Christian. So when he's writing this letter, he knows that this is probably the last letter he will ever write to Timothy. These are the last things he will ever say to him. Imagine being in that moment where this is the last opportunity you ever have to share anything to this person that matters in your life. What would you say to them? So the book of 2 Timothy is almost like a last will and testament for Paul to Timothy. And so when you read it and you read some of the words that he uses in there and some of the emotions in it, it changes the way you read it because you realize these are his last words to Timothy. When you understand that, it changes the way that you view it. So speaking of 2 Timothy, this is my challenge for you guys today. Again, I'm giving you challenges where there are more things I want you guys to do in regards to the Bible and things like that so you can put your faith into practice, not just be like, okay, Josh said it and that's it. I want you guys to put this into action. So 2 Timothy, it's in the New Testament. It has a whole 4 chapters in it. That's it, 4 chapters. So this is my challenge to you guys. This week, I want you to take the time to read the book of 2 Timothy. 4 chapters. I've already given you some background on it, about what the book is about, who wrote it, and so on. But as you do it, I want you guys to answer these questions to help you understand it better. As you read it each and every day, even if you know the reason behind it, I want you to ask these questions as you finish reading it. Why did Paul write this? Why did he write this to Timothy? And the second thing, what is he saying to Timothy here in this verse or in this chapter? What is he saying to Timothy? What is he trying to get across to Timothy? Because remember, that is the person that he wrote the book to, the letter to. But then after you understand that, then we take the application from it. What does this mean for me? What can I get from this? What does this mean for my life? See, it's important that as we start reading the Bible, we look at it in the right context. We don't be those people that just kind of spit out verses or read something and say, I don't understand this, whatever. But I want you guys to get into the Word. I want you to read it, and I want you to understand it and apply it to your life. So that is your challenge for today. We love you guys. We miss you. We can't wait to see you guys soon. All right. Bye-bye.